The Grand Tour was something that happened during the 18th century and a little bit into the 19th century, but it was mainly for European men to complete this. If you were a young man of a significant amount of wealth, let's just say that, between the ages of about 18 to 23, that I'm just saying roughly, yes, you could be younger and you could be older, and you were a bachelor, you would go on what was called the Grand Tour. The Grand Tour was a trip all through Europe where you essentially went to different monuments, you looked at different works of arts, and you essentially became as cultured as you possibly could. Because the hope was, if you were this gentleman who was able to do this, you were probably in line to own a fortune, right? And you were probably going to have some type of title. So we have many future kings, dukes, a variety of different businessmen, things like that, who were lucky enough to go on the Grand Tour. Americans were slightly different. American bachelors did the Grand Tour as well, yes. However, over in America, things were a little bit different. Americans typically went on the Grand Tour with their wives, so they would do it as a couple. When you went on the Grand Tour, you would be accompanied with definitely servants, at least one, if not, two or three, and you would definitely have a tutor. You would start in Paris and you would work your way south. You would go to Italy. If you were lucky enough, you'd go down to Greece. You would, work your way around the Mediterranean. Basically wherever you had access, or where you wanted to go, maybe a little more. You often went into England and Ireland and Germany and places like that as well. So it was a really great trip. When you would go on these trips, you always wanted to get some type of souvenir, okay? There were two types of souvenirs that were called city views. City views are something that, if you want to think of it like a postcard. I don't know, do you guys remember postcards? Do they even make postcards now that I'm thinking about it? Anyways, so you would find an artist, most of the time a street artist, that would, let's be real, they would see you coming a mile away, definitely look like somebody that was on the Grand Tour. And you would say, I want a small painting that is of a cityscape. There were two types of them. You could do a capriccio. Capriccio was where the artist would mix actual features or actual ruins of some specific location that you had been to. And they would create a really cool composition that was completely made up. Second one was a veduta. Veduta is a very naturalistic rendering of a well-known tourist attraction. Vedutas almost look as if it was done by a camera. Of course, we don't have cameras quite yet, but it's so realistic in its rendering, so much so you sometimes see dirt and little pieces of trash and things like that. So capriccio is made up by the artist, but the actual monuments or sculptures or anything that you've seen are in there. They're accurate. They're just positioned and placed in kind of a made up composition. Veduta, completely opposite. It's one spot and it's perfection. So let's look at some examples. Oops, just kidding. Sorry about that. Here we go. All right. A veduta. Veduta, this one is done by Canaletto, the Doge's Palace. When we look at this veduta, you can definitely see everything is rendered perfectly, absolutely beautifully, right down to the architecture. You can see the tracery, the different the different windows, the different peaks, the tiles. Everything is incredible. The arcade at the very bottom of the building, an arcade is a row of arches. All of the people, it's as if Canaletto caught these people at a specific moment in time and just froze everything. The ships really cool. They're coming into port. Some of them, you know, you can see the ropes tied around the docks. You can see the people on the ships. You can see the oars sitting around. You can also, if you notice real closely, little ripples of water, and you can see the waves. But what I love is kind of the messy part. If you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, it looks as if there's a bunch of trash everywhere. And I just find that fascinating with Vedutas. They capture that moment in time for whoever has commissioned them. They capture the trash, the whatever people are doing, what they're wearing. Are they bending over? Are they talking? Are they in groups? They capture the sky. They capture the wind and the sails. What direction are they blowing, and so forth. They're absolutely stunning. So Vedutas are naturalistic renderings of a specific moment in time and place. Here's another example of a Veduta by Canaletto. This is San Marco Square. And I believe, here we go. So here's an actual photograph that I took. It's a few years old, but just to show you, you know, even today, how similar they are in terms of their rendering. So just remember that. A Veduta was capture that moment, that quick moment. So the person who commissioned this work would be able to take this home and they could talk about their trip. It's the same thing as, you know, if we take a photo of a landscape or a cityscape of a town we visited and then you post it on your Instagram. This is an example of a capriccio by an artist by the name of Panini. This is a really cool example of a capriccio. I like them both. I think capriccios are more fun. I think capriccios give the artist a little bit more freedom to do what they want. So clearly the patron of this work had gone to the Colosseum, he'd gone to the Pantheon, probably seen a couple triumphal arches. He sees the artist and says, hey, I've been here, here, and here. I've seen these said sculptures. Will you put them in a capriccio for me? And that's how that was done. There's also Grand Tour portraits. Let's be real. There's so many portraits in art history. However, when you see a Grand Tour portrait, they are pretty easy to identify. Here's how. They're always going to be oil and canvas. They are generally life size. And when I say life size, I mean about 9 feet tall by 6 feet tall. Okay, about. Some are smaller, some are bigger, but they're roughly that size. They always have a high degree of naturalism. So, you know, you're going to see the artist giving as much attention to light and shadows and volumes, the body proportions, architectural proportions, things like that. Everything's going to fit in its space perfectly. So a Grand Tour portrait is typically done of a young gentleman who is on this trip. So similar to taking a photograph of a cityscape and posting it on your Instagram, what you would do if you were on the Grand Tour portrait is you would get your portrait done, and then all around you have all of the things that you've visited or, you know, seen. You're usually standing. So here you are alone, you're standing full figure. Usually you're facing the viewer. Sometimes, as we're seeing here, Sir Gregory Page Turner, get that? Page Turner. What he's doing is looking off to his right, so it's a little bit more dramatic. You're always going to see the male figure in what we call the swagger pose. Yep, the swagger pose. That is very confident. He looks like he's standing there kind of very full of himself. He knows he's a badass. So we're definitely going to see that swagger. They will always be in luxurious costumes. Their best outfit. Did Sir Gregory Page Turner travel around Rome in this red crushed velvet embroidered 3-piece suit? Probably not. he would have sweat his ass off. However, for the Grand Tour portrait, yes, he's got to be in his best outfit. So we're always going to see that. You're always going to see accoutrements. So the accoutrements are pivotal when picking out your Grand Tour portraits. They're easy to spot once you know these things. Behind him, you have different architectural elements. You have sculptural busts, you have books, you have maps, you have beautiful marble tables, fluted columns in the background, swags of drapery. He's clearly at some type of estate. He has the money to be at an estate. We've created this setting for him to sit in, which shows you that he's rich. He's very, very confident in himself with that swagger pose, and he's seen and done a lot of things on his trip. One other thing that is not always shown, but sometimes is there, is the accompaniment of a dog. Absolutely love the dog. Those are my favorites. But this is, I believe his last name is Coke. And what we're looking at here is the epitome of a Grand Tour portrait. So remember, oil on canvas, generally life size. It is usually a standing male figure, okay? Because remember, only gentlemen in Europe went on the Grand Tour. Women never did this. They never did this alone. Americans would do a Grand Tour, but they would do it with their husbands. Remember, American women. They would always be wearing luxurious costumes. So again, velvet, satins, lace, ruffles, silk, you name it, they had it. The setting is always full of accoutrements. So sculpture, architecture, maps, books, anything that would reference where they'd been and what they'd seen. And then, of course, sometimes you would see a dog. Grand Tour is a really, really interesting time in history, and especially in art. We see really a style that's set up in what was preferred, and everybody essentially followed suit.